A Forest Hearth, A Romance of Indiana in the 30s, by Charles Major, Chapter 2. The Bachelor Heart. Rita's first great pain kept her sleepless through many hours. She resolved that when Dick should come again, she would throw off the restraint that so hurt and provoked her, and would show him, at whatever cost, that she had not intended her hard words for him. The next day seemed an age. She sought all kinds of work to make the time pass quickly. Churning, usually irksome, was a luxury. She swept every nook and corner of the house and longed to sweep the whole farm. That evening she did not wait till Dick was in sight to put on her ribbon. She changed it many times from her throat to her hair and back again, long before the sun had even thought of going down. Her new attitude toward Dick had at least one good effect. It took from her the irritation she had so often felt against herself. Losing part of her self-consciousness in the whirl of a new, strong motive wrought a great change not only in her appearance but also in her way of looking at things, herself included. She was almost satisfied with the image her mirror reflected. She might well have been entirely satisfied. There was neither guile nor vanity in the girl's heart, nor a trace of deceit in her face, only gentleness, truth, and beauty. She had not hitherto given much thought to her face, but with the change in her way of seeing Dick, her eyes were open to the value of personal beauty. Then she began to wonder. Regret for her hard words to Dick deepened her longing for beauty, in the hope that she might be admired by him and more easily forgiven. Billy Little, who had seen much of the world, once said that there was a gentleness and beauty about Rita at this time which he believed no other woman ever possessed. She was child and woman then, and that combination is hard to beat even in a plain girl. Poor old Billy Little. He was more than 30 years her senior, but I believe there is no period in the life of a bachelor, however case-hardened he may be, when his heart is entirely safe from the enemy. That evening Rita sat on the porch watching for Dick, but the sun and her heart went down, and Dick did not come. The plaintive rain cry of a whippoorwill from the branches of a dead tree across the river, and the whispering peep, peep, peep of the sleepy robins in the foliage near the house helped to deepen her feeling of disappointment, and she was thoroughly miserable. She tried to peer through the gloaming, and feared her father and mother would mark her troubled eagerness and guess its cause. But her dread of their comments was neutralized by the fear that Dick would not come. Opportunity is the touchstone of fate, save with women. With them, it is fate itself. Had Dick appeared late that evening, there would have been a demonstration on Rita's part, regardless of who might have seen, and the young man would have discovered an interesting truth. Rita, deeply troubled, discovered it for herself, and thought surely it was plain enough for everyone else to see. When darkness had fallen, she became reckless of concealment, and walked a short way up the river in the hope of meeting Dick. The hooting of an owl frightened her, but she did not retreat till she heard the howling of a wolf. Then she ran home at full speed and went to bed full of the most healthful suffering a heart can know, that which it feels because of the pain it has given another. Thus Dick missed both opportunity and demonstration. The next evening he missed another opportunity, and by the morning of the third day our little girl, blushing at the thought, determined to write to him and ask his forgiveness. There was one serious obstacle to writing. She had neither paper nor ink, nor money with which to buy them. Hitherto she had found little use for money, but now the need was urgent. Tom always had money, and she thought of begging a few pennies from him. No, Tom would laugh and refuse. If she should ask her mother, a string of questions would ensue with no for a snapper. Her father would probably give her money if she asked for it, but her mother would ask questions later. She would ride to town, 1 mile south on Blue, and ask credit of her old friend Billy Little, to the extent of a sheet of paper and a small pot of ink. For a pen she would catch a goose, pluck a quill, and ask Billy to cut it. Billy could cut the best pen of anyone on Blue. Dinner over, she caught the goose after an exciting chase, plucked the quill, saddled her horse, and was slipping away from the backyard when her mother's voice halted her. "Where are you going?" asked Mrs. Margarita. I'm going to see Sukey Yates," answered the girl. She had not intended going to Sukey's, but after her mother's peremptory demand for information, she formed the ex post facto resolution to do so, that her answer might not be a lie. "Now, what on earth do you want there?" asked the Chief Justice. I only want to sit a while with her," answered Rita. "May I go? The work is all done." "No, you shan't go," responded the kind old lady. "You see, one of the maxims of this class of good persons is to avoid as many small pleasures as possible in others. That they apply the rule to themselves doesn't help to make it endurable." Rita, with whom to hear was to obey, sprang from her horse. But just then her father came upon the scene. His soft words and soothing suggestions mollified Justice, and Rita started forth upon her visit to Suki. She had told her mother she was going to see Suki Yates, and when she thought upon the situation she became convinced that her ex post facto resolution, even though honestly acted upon, would not avail her in avoiding a lie, unless it were carried out to the letter and in the spirit. There was not a lie in this honest girl, not a fractional part of a lie, from her toes to her head. She went straight to see Suki, and did not go to town, though she might easily have done so. She did not fear discovery. She feared the act of secret disobedience, and above all, she dreaded the lie. A strong motive might induce her to disobey, but the disobedience in that case would be open. She would go to Suki's today. Tomorrow she would go to town in open rebellion, if need be. The thought of rebellion caused her to tremble, but let the powers at home also tremble. Like many of us, she was brave for tomorrow's battle, since tomorrow never comes. Rita was not in the humor to listen to Suki's good-natured prattle, so her visit was brief, and she soon rode home, her heart full of trouble and rebellion. But the reward for virtue, which frequently fails to make its appearance, waited upon our heroine. When she was about to dismount at the home gate, her father called to her, "While you're on your horse, Rita, you might ride to town and ask Billy Little if there's a letter. The mail came in 3 days ago." The monster, rebellion, at once disappeared, and the girl, conscience-smitten, resolved never, never to entertain him again. She rode down the river path through the forest, happy after many days of wretchedness. Billy Little's store building consisted of 2 log-built rooms. The long front room was occupied by the store and post office. The back room, as Billy said, was occupied by his piano and himself. When he saw Rita, clothed in dainty calico and smiles, gallop up to the hitching post, his heart was filled with joy, his face beamed with pleasure, and his scalp was suffused by a rosy hue. Billy's smooth-shaven face was pale, the blood never mounting to his cheeks, so he made amends as best he could and blushed with the top of his head. "Good evening to you, Rita," he said as he lifted her to the ground and hitched her horse. "I am delighted to see you. You come like the rosy sun after a rainy day." "The sun doesn't come after the day, Billy Little," retorted the laughing girl. "You probably mean the pale moon or a poor, dim little star." "I know what I mean," answered the little old fellow in tones of mock indignation, "and I'll not allow a chit of a girl to correct my astronomy. I'm your schoolmaster, and if I say the sun comes after the day, why, after the day it comes. Now there," he continued as they entered the store, "turn your face to the wall and do penance. Such insolence." The girl faced the wall, and after a moment she looked laughingly over her shoulder at him. "If you'll let me turn around, I'll admit that the sun comes at midnight, if you say it does, Billy Little." "Midnight it is," said Billy sternly. "Take your seat." She ran, laughing, to Billy, and clasping his arm affectionately, said with a touch of seriousness, "It comes whenever you say it does, Billy Little. I'd believe you before I'd believe myself. Poor old bachelor heart, look to your breastworks, the enemy is at hand." "Now I've noticed," said cynical Billy, "that whenever the feminine heart wants something, it grows tender. What do you want?" "I want a letter, Billy Little. Father sent me down to fetch it, if there is one." "Yes, there's one here," he answered, going back of the glass-covered pigeonholes. "There's one here from Indianapolis. It's from your Uncle Jim Fisher. I suppose he's after your father again to sell his farm and invest the proceeds in the Indianapolis store. Precious fool he'll be if he does." "Indeed, he would not be a fool," retorted the girl. "I'm just wild for father to move to Indianapolis. I don't want to grow up in the country like a ragweed or mullein stalk, and I—" "Like a sweetbriar or a goldenrod," interrupted Billy. "And I don't want you to advise him not to go," she continued, unmindful of Billy's flowers of poesy. "Well, here's the letter. Do you want anything else?" "No, oh no. "Then for once I've found a disinterested female in a coaxing mood," replied this modern Diogenes. He came from behind the counter, pretending to believe her, and started toward the door. "How's Dick?" he asked. "I haven't seen him for a fortnight. I've been wondering what has become of him." The girl's face turned red, painfully so to Billy, as she replied, I haven't seen him either for a very long time, 3 days." She stopped talking, and Billy remained silent. After a long pause, she spoke up briskly, as if she had just remembered something. "Oh, I almost forgot. There is something I want, and after all, you're right. I want, will you, I say, Billy Little, won't you let me have a sheet of writing paper and a pot of ink? And won't you cut this pen for me?" Billy took the quill and turned to go behind the counter. The girl was dancing nervously on her toes. "But say, Billy Little, I can't pay you for them now. Will, you trust me?" Billy did not reply, but went to the letter paper box. "You had better take more than one sheet, Rita," he said softly. "If you're going to write a love letter to Dick, you will be sure to spoil the first sheet, perhaps the second and third." Billy's head blushed vividly after he had spoken, for his remark was a prying one. The girl had no thought of writing a love letter, and she resented the insinuation. She was annoyed because she had betrayed her purpose in buying the paper, but she loved Billy Little too dearly to show her resentment, and remained silent. The girl, Billy, and Dick, differing as much as it is possible for 3 persons to differ, save in their common love for books and truth, had been friends ever since her babyhood, and Billy was the only person to whom she could easily lay bare her heart. Upon second thought, she concluded to tell him her trouble. "It was this way, Billy Little," she began, and after stumbling over many words, she made a good start, and the little story of her troubles fell from her lips like crystal water from a babbling spring. After her story was finished, and she found great relief in the telling, Billy said, "Of course I'll trust you. I'd trust you for the whole store if you wanted to buy it. I'd trust you with my soul," he added after a pause. "There's not a false drop of blood in your veins." "Ah, Billy Little," she answered, as she took his hand caressingly for an instant, and her eyes, with their wonderful capacity for expression, said the rest. "So, you see, I do want to write a letter to Dick," she said, dropping his hand. "But it is not to be a love letter. I could not write one if I wished. I was very wicked. Oh, Billy Little, I honestly think at times I'm the worst girl that ever lived. Something terrible will happen to me for my wickedness, I'm sure. Mother says it will." "Yes, something terrible, I'm sure," returned Billy musingly. "And I want to apologize to him," she continued, "and tell him I didn't mean it. Isn't it right that I should?" "Oh, yes, answered Billy, starting out of his reverie. "Of course, yes, Max Welton's brays are bonny, yes, oh yes." When vexed, pleased, or puzzled, Billy was apt to hum the opening line of Annie Laurie, though the first 4 words were all that received the honor of distinct articulation. The remainder of the stanza he allowed to die away under his breath. Rita was of course familiar with the habit, but this time she could not tell which motive had prompted the musical outburst. Billy himself couldn't have told, but perhaps the bachelor heart was at the bottom of it. "Thank you, Billy Little, for the paper," said Rita. "I'll pay you with the first money I get." Billy silently helped her to mount her horse. She smiled. "Goodbye," and he walked slowly back to the store, muttering to himself, Billy Little, your breastworks are weak, and you are a Max Welton's brays, good evening, Mrs. Carson. Something I can do for you this evening? Sugar? Ah, yes, plenty. Best in town. Best shipment I ever had." And Billy was once more a merchant. When Rita reached home, supper was ready, and after the supper work was finished, it was too dark to write. So the letter was postponed a day, and she took her place on the porch, hoping that Dick would come, and that the letter might be postponed indefinitely. But he did not come. Next morning churning had again become loathsome, sweeping was hard work, and dinner was a barbarous institution. Rita had no appetite, and to sympathize with those who are hungry, one must be hungry. Innumerable very long minutes had woven themselves into mammoth hours, when Rita, having no table in her room, found herself lying on the floor writing her momentous letter. It was not to be a love letter, simply an appeal for forgiveness to a friend whom she had wantonly injured. "Dear old Billy Little," she said to herself when she opened the package. What pretty paper, and he has given me 6 sheets in place of one, and a little pot of ink, and a sandbox. I wonder if the quill is a good one. Ah, 2, 3 quills. Dear old Billy Little. Here's enough paper to last me for years. In that respect, she was mistaken. She experienced difficulty with effort number 1, but finished the letter and read it aloud, found it wholly unsatisfactory, and destroyed it. She used greater care with the next, but upon reading it over, she found she had said too much of what she wished to leave unsaid, and too little of what she wanted to say. She destroyed number 2 with great haste and some irritation, for it was almost a love letter. The same fate befell numbers 3, 4, and 5. After all, Billy's liberal supply of paper would not last for years. If it proved sufficient for one day, she would be satisfied. Number 6, right or wrong, must go to Dick, so she wrote simply and briefly what was in her heart. Dear friend Dick, my words were not intended for you. I was angry with Tom, as I had good reason to be, though he spoke the truth. I did put on my ribbon because I saw you coming, and I have cried every night since then because of what I said to you, and because you do not come to let me tell you how sorry I am. You should have given me a chance. I would have given you one. Rita. It was a sweet, straightforward letter, half womanly, half childish, and she had no cause to be ashamed of it, but she feared it was bold, and tears came to her eyes when she read it, because there were no more sheets of paper, and modest or bold it must go to Dick. Having written the letter, she had no means of sending it, but she had entered upon the venture, and was determined to carry it through. Mrs. Bays and her husband had driven to town, and there was no need for ex post facto resolutions. When the letter had been properly directed and duly sealed, the girl saddled her horse and started away on another journey to Sukey Yates. This time, however, she went somewhat out of her way, riding up the river path through the forest to Dick Bright's home. When she reached the barnyard gate, Dick was hitching the horses to the big wagon. He came at Rita's call, overjoyed at the sight of her. He knew she had come to ask forgiveness. For many months past he had tried not to see that she was unkind to him, but her words on the porch had convinced him, and he saw that her coldness had been intentional. Of course, he did not know the cause of her altered demeanor, and had regretfully put it down to an altered sentiment on her part. But when he saw her at the barnyard gate, he was again in the dark as to her motive. When Dick came up to her, she handed him the letter over the gate, saying, "Read it alone, let no one see it." Dick had only time to say, "Thank you," when the girl struck her horse and galloped down the forest path, bound for Sukey. When she had passed out of sight among the trees, Dick went down the river to a secluded spot, known as the Step-Off, where he could read the letter without fear of detection. He had long suspected that his love for the girl was not altogether brotherly, and his recent trouble with her had crystallized that suspicion into certainty. But he saw nothing back of the letter but friendship and contrition. The girl's love was so great a treasure that he dared not even hope for it, and was more than satisfied with the platonic affection so plainly set forth in her epistle. We who have looked into Rita's heart know of a thing or two that does not resemble Platonism. But the girl herself did not fully know what she felt, and Dick was sure she could not under any circumstances feel as he did. His mistake grew partly out of his lack of knowledge that woman's flesh and blood is of exactly the same quality that covers the bones and flows in the veins of man. And, well, Rita was Rita. And in Dick's opinion, no other human being was ever of the quality of her flesh, or cast in the mold of her nature. The letter told him that he still held her warm, tender love as a friend. He was thankful for that, and would neither ask nor expect anything more. If upon Rita's former visit to Sukey she had been too sad to enjoy the vivacious little maiden, upon this occasion she was too happy. She sat listening patiently to her chat, without hearing much of it, until Sukey said, "Dick was over to see me last night. I think he's so handsome, don't you?" Rita was so startled that she did not think anything at the moment, and Sukey presently asked, "Don't you think he has a fine head? And his eyes are glorious. The gray is so dark, and they look right at you." Rita, compelled to answer, said, "I think he is all right. Strong. Indeed, he is strong," responded Sukey. "When he takes hold of you, you just feel like he could crush you. Oh, it's delicious. It's thrilling. When you feel that a man could just tear you to pieces if he wanted to." Why? Asked Rita. I don't understand. Oh, just because, replied Suki, shrugging her shoulders and laughing softly, her red lips parted, her little teeth glistening like wet ivory, and the dimples twinkling mischievously. Just because explained nothing to Rita, but something in Suki's laughter and manner aroused undefined and disagreeable suspicions, so she said, Well, Suki, I must be going home. Why, you just came, returned Suki, still laughing softly. She had shot her arrow intentionally and had seen it strike the target's center. Suki was younger than Rita, but she knew many times a thing or two, while poor Rita's knowledge of those mystic numbers was represented by the figure O. Why should Dick take hold of anyone, thought Rita, while riding home, and above all, why should he take hold of Suki? Suki was pretty, and Suki's prettiness and Dick's taking hold seemed to be related in some mysterious manner. She who saw others through the clear lens of her own conscience did not doubt Dick and Suki, but notwithstanding her trustfulness, a dim suspicion passed through her mind that something might be wrong if Dick had really taken hold of Suki. Where the evil was, she could not determine, and to connect the straightforward manly fellow with anything dishonorable or wicked was impossible to her. So she dismissed the subject, and it left no trace upon her mind save a slight irritation against Suki. Rita felt sure that Dick would come to see Tom that evening, and the red ribbon was in evidence soon after supper. Dick did come, and there was at least one happy girl on blue,